First, I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar today. This is the third webinar in our 10 webinar series. So be sure to tune back into the Stride Animal Health and the Bluebonnet Feeds websites to register for each of these webinars that'll be happening every Thursday and Friday through May 1st. So today we have Dr. Bill Vandergrift here presenting. Dr. Bill is a PhD equine nutritionist. More importantly, though, in my opinion, is the fact that he's a horseman, which means he actually understands the complexities of the horse and the horse as an athlete. His work has been devoted, he has literally devoted his life to solving unique problems through specialized nutrition approaches. And the fruits of his labor are now available to the public through the Stride Animal Health brand. So today, Dr. Bill is going to discuss allergies and immune health in horses. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please use the chat box on, should be on the right side of your screen. Just type your questions kind of as we go, and we'll save that list of questions for the end. And I will actually pull questions out of the chat to ask Dr. Bill, and he can answer them live with the amount of time that we have left after his presentation. So don't worry if, when you do type in your question to that chat, it's not going to put anything up on the screen or anything like that. It'll all essentially be hidden, so it won't interrupt his presentation. So don't be afraid to go ahead and put questions in as you think of them. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Dr. Bill.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Nichols. Today, we've actually are going to tackle a pretty complex subject in, what's going on here? Technical difficulties already. Why am I not advancing? There we go. All right, now we seem to be working. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Okay, but as I was saying, we're going to tackle a very complex subject today, and it's actually going to, it's impossible really to discuss the entire immune system of the horse, in one presentation. So we're going to limit our discussion today talking about what part of the immune system we can affect by nutrition. And I think most of you are aware, since the majority of the horse's immune system is located in the intestine, that still gives us plenty to talk about. So the first component of the immune system in the horse I'd like to discuss is the horse's microbiome. The microbiome is now considered to be a separate organ, essentially, within the animal, and that applies to people as well as horses. But I think it's important to understand that when we say microbiome, what we are referring to are all of the microorganisms that exist in the digestive tract. And that's going to include bacteria, that's going to include fungi or fungus. And people say, "Ooh, I have fungus in my gut." Yes, you do. But just like there are good bacteria and bad bacteria, there's good fungi and there's bad fungi. Same with protozoa and the same with viruses. And yes, viruses make up a component of the microbiome. And obviously, everybody is aware we are dealing with one nasty virus at the moment, the coronavirus. That is one we don't want in our bodies. But I think it's of note, and we'll kind of touch on this a little bit as we go through today, that not everybody, but many people that have become infected with the coronavirus, their first symptoms have been gastrointestinal, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, etc. So viruses attack the gut, just like many other pathogenic organisms do. But again, I want to emphasize that of all these different categories of microorganisms, again, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, viruses, what we want in our guts are the good ones, and we want to leave out or get rid of the bad ones as much as possible. I think that kind of goes without saying. But how do we know if we have a healthy microbiome or not? And one of the first things that we will look at is what is the level of diversity? In other words, how many different species of bacteria, how many different species of fungi, how many different species of beneficial protozoa exist in our microbiome. And it's been well established that as you increase diversity, you increase many, many different particular species, that your microbiome is going to be more viable and it's going to be healthier, your immune system's going to work better, and your horse, or, and if it might be you personally, the more you're going to be able to obtain from your diet and stay healthy. Now, when the horse is stressed or otherwise suffers any type of illness, one of the very first things that happens is the microbiome loses diversity. And some of the beneficial bacteria that we, shall we say, are labeled as most desirable, in other words, the ones that give us the greatest benefits in terms of immune refunction, in terms of dietary utilization, those are often some of the first ones we lose. And so as a result, then, when a horse is stressed or gets sick and we lose that diversity, our immune system suffers, our ability or his ability to utilize his diet suffers. We also know from repeated research that horses with metabolic syndrome in general, specifically horses with insulin resistance, have a less diverse microbiome than horses that we would consider to be healthy or non-metabolic horses. And we're going to discuss a couple of other things that are going to be different in the digestive tract in these metabolic horses versus healthy horses. Now, in addition to diversity being an indication of a healthy microbiome, we also want that microbiome to be balanced. And I think the best way to explain balance in a microbiome is to discuss how different species of bacteria in particular work together. So if we have a diverse microbiome and it's healthy, we have many different microorganisms, many different species of bacteria that exist in that microbiome, and they all tend to have different and separate jobs. For example, some bacteria may produce gas. Methane is a common gas that's produced in the process of fermentation, which is taking place by the bacteria. But then we have other bacterial species that will actually then utilize that gas that was produced. So we have one species that is producing gas, we have another species that's using that gas that's produced, and everything remains in balance. Now, if gas production should exceed gas utilization by various bacterial species, then the gas builds up and your horse is now predisposed to a gaseous colic. And that can actually happen very quickly for various reasons. Dietary changes, weather changes, lots of things come into play that can affect what species are active, which species are less active, and the balance can be a little skewed off to the side, and therefore things don't work as well as they should. Another important point, I think, to understand is that the majority of the bacteria in your horse's microbiome, or not shall I should say, the majority of the beneficial bacteria in your horse's microbiome are actually anaerobic. That means they can't live without oxygen. Excuse me, let me get this right. They're anaerobic, they can't live with oxygen, which means they cannot live outside the horse's body. So because of that feature, we can't use them in a probiotic preparation because they would not survive. So it's been well documented that the most effective way to support those beneficial anaerobic bacteria is actually with the use of prebiotics. These are going to be compounds which help promote the growth of bacteria in general, but specific prebiotics can actually then support the growth of specific anaerobic bacteria that we want in that microbiome at higher levels. And again, we'll mention that further as we go through. So the diversity, the balance of the microbiome is what we're after, but also keep in mind that specific composition of the microbiome can actually affect whether your horse is going to be lean or obese. There is research ongoing right now in terms of human medicine, where in the trial stages, and it's looking very promising, there is one particular bacteria or probiotic that can be dosed orally to people, and what it's going to do is reduce abdominal fat. If we are, shall I say, if the researchers are successful in actually getting that particular probiotic to market, I think we should all buy stock in it. So you kind of get the idea. But this is one individual bacteria establishing itself in the microbiome that can have that effect. And it's also been well established that lean horses, lean people will tend to have a different microbiome composition than obese horses or obese people. Your microbiome can also affect your horse's temperament. As Dr. Nichols indicated in the leaky gut webinar last week, there is a direct connection between the brain and the gut. And certain bacteria in that microbiome can have specific action on that neural connection. And as a result, they can affect the horse's temperament. They can either get them hyperreactive or they can actually get them more relaxed and calm. The composition of your microbiome affects what your horse prefers to eat. You know, often we hear, oh, my horse is very picky. He won't eat this or he won't eat that. If you've got some type of supplement or food source that you would think most horses should eat, but you have a horse that, again, is labeled very picky, just to be blunt, there's two reasons why that would be. A, he's got an unbalanced microbiome, or B, he's spoiled. So nothing wrong with spoiling your horse, but keep in mind that if you find that your horse has become an extremely picky eater, that is one symptom of an unbalanced microbiome. In fact, in people, again, it's also been well documented that, for example, if you are craving carbs, it's actually your microbiome that's craving the carbs. So you change the microbiome, you change that craving. And when a way to change that microbiome is to change the diet, which means you're just going to have to say, even though I'm craving those carbs, I'm simply not going to fall in and feed my bugs those carbs that they want. And your microbiome will change as a result of a change in your dietary composition. The composition of your microbiome also determines how susceptible you or your horse are going to be to pathogenic bacteria. And there's a number of factors that come into play. One is the more diverse, the more balanced the microbiome is, the more difficult it's going to be for any pathogenic bacteria to gain a foothold, so to speak, in your gut, and therefore they won't be able to make you sick. You also have specific bacteria in your microbiome that can actually kill pathogenic bacteria. For example, Bacillus subtilis, and Bluebonnet feeds and Stride supplements actually utilize a specific Bacillus subtilis in their products, which has been documented to have the ability to kill C. diff. And so not only do you reduce pathogenic load from a competitive standpoint, you know, with a diverse and balanced microbiome, but you can also get essentially antibiotic activity from various bacteria themselves. And then lastly, a very important function, and one we're going to talk about today, or are talking about today, is how the microbiome affects immune function and the immune system. and there is always crosstalk going on between the microbiome and the immune cells within the intestine. And when that crosstalk or that communication between the microbiome and the immune cells gets disrupted for whatever reason, that's when you begin to open up the door for abnormal immune function. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So your take home for the microbiome and how it affects immune function is always remember you want a balanced microbiome and you want as diverse of a microbiome as possible. Second most important take home is stress of any kind, whether it's a physical stress, a mental stress, a metabolic stress, stress of any kind is going to reduce microbiome diversity. And that then leads to an unbalanced microbiome, which then in turn leads to adverse or abnormal immune function. So let's take a little bit closer look at what's going on in the gut and how the microbiome interacts with the immune system and what are the components of the immune system in the gut. Now, if I get my pointer to work here, there we go. So in this diagram, you can see this line right here, we can see this is representing the small intestine. This is representing the large intestine. Now, there are some minor differences between the small intestine and the large intestine, but there's an awful lot of similarities as well. So all of these little specks that you see, though, that represents the bacteria, the protozoa, the fungi, and the viruses that you want as a component of the microbiome. Next thing I want to point out is this yellowish line that goes all the way along the intestinal lining. And you can see that's labeled, that is a mucus lining. That forms a protective barrier between the bacteria or the microorganisms in the microbiome and the intestinal cells itself. Now, each one of these little cells are the epithelial cells of the intestine. And again, last week, when Dr. Nichols talked about leaky gut, she talked about how you want those cells to be tightly attached to each other. And so this is simply representing a healthy intestinal epithelial. And you can see how this mucus lining then lays on top of that epithelial, of those epithelial cells, and provides protection from any pathogenic or any particles. For example, who knows what a horse is going to eat sometimes. So it provides protection between what's inside the intestine and those epithelial cells. Now, as we mentioned earlier, if diversity of the microbiome or balance of the microbiome goes down, one of the things that happens is the thickness of this mucus layer decreases. In fact, insulin-resistant horses, we've actually measured the thickness of this mucus layer, and we know that when a horse becomes insulin resistant, that the thickness of that mucus layer decreases. So the protection that provides then goes down, which is another reason why when a horse develops insulin resistance or any other type of illness, then they become more susceptible to any type of metabolic dysfunction or digestive dysfunction, or I say metabolic dysfunction that's related to the function of the intestinal tract. Now, a couple other things I'd like to point out. There's an organ here in the small intestine called the Peyer's patch, and you see this M cell right here that's associated with it. The function of this Peyer's patch is essentially to monitor the composition of the microbiome. Now, how does it do that? It does that with this M cell. This M cell can actually intentionally allow bacteria to go from the inside the small intestine into this Peyer's patch, which is part of the lymphoid system. And this Peyer's patch then identifies that bacteria and says, okay, you're a good bug. You can stay, no problems. But then if a pathogenic bacteria comes through, this Peyer's patch essentially then raises a signal and says, whoops, we've got something that doesn't belong here, i.e. coronavirus, for example. And then that will trigger the other components of the immune system then to take action and try to get rid of that particular foreign particle, whether it's a bacteria or whatever it might be. Now, illustrated down here, and we'll show this in a little bit simpler terms, but these dendritic cells, these are kind of like if back in high school, these are kind of your hall monitors. They kind of float around, they come in contact with various particles, bacteria, and they determine whether or not they're wearing white hats or black hats, so to speak. If they're white hats, they leave them alone. If they're black hats, then they recruit other parts of the immune system, such as lymphocytes or macrophages, which will then attach or attack that particular particle and try to get rid of it. Now, to help you understand this a little bit easier, I have borrowed some slides from our friends at Diamond V. And I think this illustration helps explain what I was just trying to illustrate to you in a lot easier way to visualize it. And by the way, Diamond V specializes in yeast cultures, which are actually beneficial fungi. So that's beneficial part of the immune system. And they've got lots of research that discusses how their particular products improve the immune system. And we use Diamond V products in both our feeds and our supplements. But it's this fence that they have illustrated here that represents your intestinal epithelial. So you just kind of think of those intestinal epithelial as a nice fence. Here we've got this bad guy, coronavirus, C. diff, whatever you want to call it, and the fence itself kind of keeps them out. But you can see there's little spaces in that fence, even in a good, healthy fence. So, and also remember, you've actually got M cells that are purposely allowing certain bacteria to go through this fence so they can be monitored. So in a healthy immune system, you've got components such as the dendritic cells and neutrophils that are looking out for the bad guys. If they identify somebody that's not supposed to be there, you have natural killer cells, and I love this illustration of this big bad bulldog, especially since I'm in Georgia at the moment. And that natural killer cell will immediately then denature that bad bacteria. You also have macrophages, which kind of act as, I left this, the neighborhood watch, and they will engulf bad components and get rid of them that way. You've got the complement C3 system, which also then kind of monitors what's coming through. And if they need to, then this is all the first line of defense. This will all be within the intestine itself, as I indicated in this diagram. These are all within the intestinal tissue itself. Now, if things get real busy, then your body refers to the second line of defense, which are essentially lymphocytes in the blood. And here we've got them illustrated as basically your patrolmen. Okay. Now, what happens if things get out of hand? And this is what happens when we get an abnormal immune response, especially if the integrity of our fence, of our intestinal lining, starts to break down a little bit. It may be all the way to leaky gut, but it may just be a slight break that you might get just due to a little bit of heat stress or any other type of challenge. Now we get more bad guys coming through, but with an unbalanced immune system, our natural killer cells turn into puppies. Our neighborhood watch is sleeping, so they're not taking care of things that come through here the way they normally would. So then things shift to our secondary immune system, and instead of just having patrolmen, they're saying, hey, we have got a major break here, And so now the entire SWAT team shows up. And now we're in a situation, I guess I would explain it this way. Um, let's say we're in Fort Worth, Texas, and somebody robs a convenience store, and that somebody happens to be wearing a cowboy hat and driving a white Chevrolet pickup truck. So the report goes out to the SWAT team. We're looking for a guy wearing a cowboy hat, driving a white Chevrolet pickup truck somewhere around Fort Worth, Texas. That doesn't narrow it down very much. And so as a result, this SWAT team then starts attacking everything that's going to fit that category, the good guys and as well as the bad guys. And even in some cases, this is our little homeowner here that you can see now has a bullseye on his back and has been fired upon. So in a really bad case, this is how you get an autoimmune response, because your primary immune system in the gut, for whatever reason, is not working efficiently. Your secondary immune system becomes hyperactive and actually then can start attacking the body itself. So I hope that kind of explains or illustrates a little bit easier what's going on. Now let's look at a real life situation here. This is an actual allergy report from a horse that suffered from hives. And instead of going through all the results, I've summarized them here. We've essentially got a horse that was tested for 95 different allergens. Only 16 of those were non-reactive. Okay, 55 of these were borderline to borderline positive. 24 of these allergens were clinically relevant. But in this particular allergy report, by their standards, this was listed right here, anything above a reaction of 400 was considered highly positive. As you can see, none of the allergens on this particular horse were highly positive. So we have an allergy report where we have many, many borderline positive to positive reactions. And if you look at some of the things that this horse reacted to, Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, alfalfa pollen, over here, borderline positives, barley, beets, carrots, molasses, oats, soybeans were all borderline positive to positive. So obviously the question for the person that owned this horse was, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to feed this horse? Especially since this horse was located in Texas, where Bermuda grass and Bahia grass is quite common. So what is actually going on here? Is this horse truly allergic to all these different allergens or antigens, or is it simply presenting with an abnormal immune function? And you can see horses that get the hives this bad, and this is a question that really needs to be answered. Is this horse truly allergic, or am I simply dealing with an immune system or immune function that's become abnormal? So whenever a horse tests allergic to multiple allergens without any of those being highly positive, as in the case we're discussing right now, it's fairly safe to assume that that horse's immune system has simply gone into an overreaction mood. In other words, the SWAT team has arrived, as we tried to illustrate earlier. And most of these horses can be helped with what we call our immune health program. That's not to say that, for example, we get a horse that's reacting this badly, where he's got these large welts and hives all over his body, and he's miserable. It's not to say we can't give him, work with the vet and use some medical applications such as DEX or antihistamines or steroids to actually suppress the immune system. And that's what those drugs do. So the reason that the horse looks like that, as we said, the SWAT team has arrived. The immune system has just gone into overdrive. So we want to suppress the immune system to help get it back to normal again. Now, this particular horse that I showed you that allergy report was actually a high-level performance horse. Its hives got so severe that the horse couldn't even be ridden. You couldn't put any tack on this horse. It was so miserable. So we put the horse on a high fiber, low starch feed, and we put the horse on the immune health program, which consists of probiotics and prebiotics to give the microbiome support. It consists of fish oil factor to help as a anti-inflammatory for the intestine. But we also have a unique ingredient called gamma tocopherol. This is a vitamin E, but it's a very specific form of vitamin E, which specifically helps cellular immunity. And after a month on this program, this horse became allergy free, went back into training, and no more allergy shots. So we were all very happy and pleased with that particular case. But what causes the immune system to function abnormally in the first place? In one word, stress. Doesn't matter if it's physical stress, emotional stress, metabolic stress. Stress is usually that snowball that starts rolling downhill that cascades into this problem eventually. And I think it's important that we take a minute, we put ourselves in our horse's shoes and try to evaluate what factors are causing stress. Some of them are pretty obvious. Some of them are fairly easily overlooked. Some of them can't be avoided. If I've got a performance horse and a show horse and I'm showing them, I've got to haul them. That's stress. If I'm hauling them in the middle of July and August, that's heat stress on top of the transport stress. So, and I can't avoid that. That's all part of training these horses and showing these horses. But we do have to recognize that that is a stressor. And different horses are going to respond to stresses differently. That's why some horses can deal with this and their immune systems never become out of whack or never become abnormal. Others do. But stress causes neural changes, it causes hormonal changes, and it causes chemical changes in the body. Essentially increases systemic inflammation, which is an immune response in and of itself. And remember, anytime a horse is stressed, you immediately reduce diversity and the balance of the microbiome. So the effects of stress on the immune system, we've talked about. The thickness of that mucus barrier goes down. So now the intestine becomes more susceptible to pathogenic bacteria and foreign particles. Stress reduces the activity of primary immune cells. So your natural killer cells turn into puppy dogs and your neighborhood watch goes to sleep. The overall immune system becomes more reactive now because you're sending in the SWAT team. So now it's going to react to everything. You're going to increase histamine production, which is for these horses that get hives, that's a very common finding is the histamine activity in the body goes up. So the net result then is that the horse becomes reactive to normal environmental allergens, normal environmental particles that it otherwise would not have reacted to. But the reason it's reacting is because the immune system has become so hyperreactive. So what are some of the symptoms of abnormal immune function? What would you look for in your horse? Well, the multiple allergies is probably the most obvious one. Poor skin and hair coat, bacterial infections, fungal infections of the skin, rain rot, for example. A horse that's really susceptible to rain rot may have an immune system that's not working correctly. Increased susceptibility to parasites. That's not one that a lot of people connect the dots on. But your horse's susceptibility to parasitic infestation is actually an immune response. So horses that get lots of parasites very easily, their immune system may not be working correctly. I can think of horses that, were in the same herd, were dewormed on schedule, along with all the other horses in the herd. But then when you go back and you do a fecal leg count, you've got one horse out of 25 that's got an elevated parasite load. And wouldn't you know, that's also the same horse that tends to get skin issues. That's also the same horse that tends to get a runny nose for whatever reason when nobody else does. It's all part of that immune response. You can also look for increased susceptibility to illnesses in general. Now, if you, EPM is also an immune response. Many horses are exposed to EPM and they develop a certain level of immunity to it. So if your immune system is working correctly, your horse's susceptibility to EPM is going to be lower than a horse who has an abnormal immune system. Likewise, a horse that's never been exposed to EPM, that then is exposed to EPM, that's where, you know, we talked about those hall monitors going around and checking who's here and who's not here. And if I got a protozoa, in this case of EPM, that I've seen before, then I can keep that under control. But let's say, for example, you've got a horse that was imported from a part of Europe where there is no EPM, and now they come over here to the United States and are now in a part of the United States where EPM is rampant. So that horse can very quickly then become exposed to EPM, but their immune system is basically naked to protection. And lots of times those horses will get very severe cases of EPM. That's not because the immune system's not working correctly. Part of it's because the immune system has had no experience with that EPM, and therefore they have no protection. But also, you bring horses over from Europe, the stress of that transport lowers their immune response. So you can see where that's a double whammy. So keeping the immune system healthy, functioning normally, can help these horses. They may still get EPM a little bit, but it'll make a difference between whether they get it, you treat it, they get over it, or we've known of some horses that imported horses like that that unfortunately have gotten EPM so badly that we couldn't help them and they had to be euthanized. Now, I don't want to take away from the fact that horses can have true allergies. So just because a horse is, you know, presenting with an allergy, it's not always because the immune system is not working right. It could be that horse's metabolism does in fact have a true allergy. And in this particular allergy report, again, yeah, we see lots of positives, but as we go through and we look at the numbers, you know, orchard grass 209, Bermuda 279, ragweed, oops, look at that number, 1,681. Look at juniper, 1,322. And there's a few other fairly high ones here. But in this report, even though we've got a number of positives, borderline positives, here's a case where you do have at least one or just a few of these allergens where this horse is definitely reacting to. So when we see numbers like that, we say, yes, this horse has a true allergy to ragweed. And what's of interest is when you look at some of the other things that this horse tested positive to, for example, barley, fire ants. Who's not allergic to fire ants? Most of us are, most of our horses are. So, you know, no surprise there. But also keep in mind, there are cross reactions. The ragweed antigen will have similarities, for example, with barley. So the fact that this horse appears to be truly allergic to ragweed, no surprise that he's also going to react to barley because there's a cross reaction between those two antigens. So this would be an example of an allergy report where we would say, okay, yes, this is a true allergy. We're not saying so there's probably nothing wrong with this horse's immune function. He's just truly allergic to ragweed. And in which case, then we would probably work more with the vet and treat this horse medically to try and get him comfortable. So what else can you do to help your horse maintain a normal immune function? Well, as we talked about stress being probably the number one thing that triggers an abnormal immune response, then our objective ought to be to reduce stress as much as practical. Notice I did not say possible, I said practical. And that goes back to the fact that depending upon what our horse is doing for a living, certain stressors are just unavoidable. And so, but those we deal with. Other stressors, then we try to reduce, and that's what I mean by as much as practical. Never forget to utilize basic feeding and nutritional principles. Base the diet on forage. Adequate mineral and vitamin intakes are critical in order to have normal immune function. If you're not feeding enough feed to meet the mineral and vitamin requirement from that feed, then use a mineral vitamin supplement in order to ensure an adequate mineral and vitamin intake. If you're utilizing, if your horse needs to be fed a bagged feed, and here I use that term because I'm going to include oats and all the way to omega force, for example, bagged feed in general. If you have to feed your horse a bagged feed, either to facilitate getting some supplements into them or to maintain desired body condition, then feed according to the horse's body condition and energy level. But if I've got a horse that's been challenged with immune function or abnormal immune function before or currently, then I prefer to use a high fiber, low carb type product, such as a feed out of the Intensify line or the Equiline Pro Care. When your horse's stress level increases, support the healthy microbiome. If you don't have a healthy microbiome, immune function is going to suffer. So we can use ADR in that case, which is a probiotic and prebiotic. Support inflammatory reaction of the intestine with the fish oil factor. We want to increase our B vitamin intake, and we can do that with Stride 101. If we've got a horse that's under stress, his immune system is being challenged, all of these immune cells, for example, lymphocytes, these are all blood cells. Blood cells need B vitamins in order for their production and their maturation to keep up with whatever that stress level is. And when a horse is under stress, his gut doesn't work as well, so your horse is not producing as many B vitamins, he's not as absorbing as many B vitamins from the gut as he would. So in this case, we need to make sure that the B vitamin supply is meeting the demand, and we can do that with a supplement like Stride 101. We want to increase the antioxidant intake, and we can do that with a product called EC, which contains the gamma tocopherol, which specifically helps cellular immunity. And we're also going to add vitamin C for the same reason that we're adding B vitamins. A horse under stress needs more vitamin C, but his innate vitamin C production goes down. So by now feeding vitamin C and feeding enough of it, we can help boost that immune response. So the nutritional products that work, the Immune Health Program, which is a combination of the ADR, the fish oil factor, and the EC. Lifeline, the plasma, which contains bioactive peptides, does a great job of supporting the immune system of the intestine. The Stride 101 to make sure your B vitamin intake and your mineral intake is met. And then a beet pulp based type feed such as Equiline Pro Care or some of the Intensify products. So with that, I think I've actually probably gone over and maybe tightened this up on question and answer period, but I'd like to go ahead and address any questions at this time. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. All right, the first question that we have in says, my horse gets stressed during rodeo performances. What supplement would I add to support him to keep everything healthy? She's currently feeding Bluebonnet Omega Force and Platinum Performance.
Assuming that the horse is not presenting with any type of immune dysfunction, as we just discussed, and we know now we've got him under stress, We want to make sure that we're supporting the immune system. Lifeline would work well in this regard. On the other hand, if we know that when we go to rodeos or perform, the horse is being stressed otherwise, if you see the horse going off feed, you see the horse becoming a little bit hyperreactive, a little bit more uptight, then we might want to look a little more at microbiome support, which then we would be looking at ADR and also possibly the ADR fish oil factor combination. So
Okay.
you've got a couple of options there. Okay.
Perfect. Okay. The next question, if my horse has seasonal allergies, how would I use the immune health program? So she's asking, should she use it year round or only during allergy season?
That's actually a great question. And you want to support, if you know that your horse has seasonal allergies, if you wait until the allergies appear, it's going to be much more difficult to get that immune system under control. So it's a situation where you either A, want to feed the immune health program year round to try and help maintain, or try to give some normality to the immune system, or if you know every year that your horse is going to start showing allergic symptoms, say, April through June, I'm just going to throw those months out, then sometime in February or March, okay, you would want to start on the immune health program. So you've got at least 30 to 45 days prior to the allergy season to try and give that immune system some support. So it kind of depends upon, how the horse is responding. If your horse's allergy season, goes from April to November, you're probably going to want to keep them on it year round. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Um, Here's another question. They're wondering what the difference is between the immune health program and then the hindgut program.
That's a very valid question. Essentially, one product is the difference between the 21-day hindgut health program and the immune health program. As we just discussed in the presentation today, by keeping the microbiome healthy and keeping intestinal tissue healthy, we're going to go a long way to supporting intestinal immune function already. And that's what the 21-day hindgut health program does. So the 21-day hindgut health program is also going to give you, good immune system support. But what the 21-day hindgut program is lacking, that the immune health program provides, is that gamma tocopherol and the vitamin C. That gamma tocopherol product or ingredient not only works at the intestinal level, it also works at the systemic level in the cells. And vitamin E will tend to work within the cell membranes. Vitamin C works within the cell cytosol, because vitamin E is fat soluble, vitamin C is water soluble. So those two work together. And but the gamma tocopherol, different than the standard vitamin E, which is the alpha tocopherol. The gamma tocopherol actually works with those immune cells and essentially keeps those hall monitors working correctly, so they're not raising false alarms. If they raise the alarm, they've got a good reason to raise the alarm, so to speak, and so that helps keep the immune system normal. So that's really the difference between the two, but it's a very important difference.
Okay.
Okay.
Here's another question. It says, I have a mare that broke out in hives about a month after getting her back from the trainer. Everyone said it was from flies, but the hives underneath her belly turned to open wounds. She is also being wormed every 5 to 6 weeks. Would this be a problem with her immune health?
It could be. There again, and it may in fact be the flies. So again, an allergic response, you know, that it comes at different levels, as I kind of talked about with EPM. You know, same way you can have a horse that gets exposed to EPM, but if they've been exposed before, chances are it'll be a mild case, but it's still a case. Likewise, if your horse happens to be truly allergic to flies or this particular fly and they get bit, if the immune system is working correctly, it may be a non-issue. I mean, it'd be irritating, but the fact that you mentioned that these bites are developing into open sores indicates we're getting a more severe immune reaction. So that does imply that we do have an issue with the immune system being a little bit hyperreactive. And so if we can give that immune systems a little bit more support, you know, the severity of those fly bites would not be as great and be easier to manage. That being said, in the best case scenario, your horse may not be allergic to those flies very much at all, in which case you are definitely talking about a hyperreaction or an abnormal immune response. And so by helping support the immune system, getting the immune system to behave in a more normal manner, then those fly bites may not be any big deal at all. I do think it's significant that you mentioned that a month after the horse came back from the trainer that it developed this, because that would indicate to me that the horse's stress level was probably elevated for multiple reasons. And again, not that anybody's doing anything wrong. I'm not saying the horse is being mistreated. It's just a fact of life that, you know, the horse was moved from point A to point B, the horse was in training, etc. So the stress level is going to increase, which can adversely affect the immune system.
Okay, let's
Okay.
do two more quick questions here. One is, so I guess playing a little bit off of the last question, once, and also let's say a horse maybe has been diagnosed with EPM or they suspect EPM. So either of these situations, once someone has done the immune health program, what does the maintenance look like after that 30 days ends?
Great question. What I recommend is that the horse remain on what I call the daily dose of the products that are within the immune health program, which would be the ADR powder, the fish oil factor, and the EC. So when you initially buy the immune health program, you're doing a loading dose for 3 weeks and then a daily dose following that. And that's going to last you about 30 days. If you buy a subsequent immune health program and you simply feed it at the daily dose, then that same program will now last you 60 days, plus or minus. And so that's just a good way to approach that.
Okay, perfect. And then one more, I hope fairly simple question for you to answer. And then there are some more complex questions that are coming in on the chat. I think I'll probably actually will reach out to these folks separately, and we may need just a
Sure.
little bit more information to fully answer their questions. So the last question is going to be, if you have to put a horse on antibiotics, what kind of impact is that going to have on the gut?
Great question. Antibiotics kill the good bugs as well as the bad bugs. So I recommend that anytime, and some antibiotics are tougher on the microbiome than others. So kind of keep that in mind as well. But anytime a horse is put on an antibiotic protocol, I like to put them on a probiotic, prebiotic protocol. So that would be ADR. So I would dose with ADR concurrent with the antibiotic to help support the immune system with that antibiotic protocol.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dr. Bill. With that, I want to remind everyone to make sure that you watch your emails. So the email, whatever email address you use to sign up for this webinar with, we will be sending out a link with a replay to this webinar. So if you missed certain sections or want to be able to reference back, that email will contain a link to a video of the webinar. And then it'll also have some special discounts that you can use on purchasing an immune health program if you want to try that for your horse. So with that, I want to say thank you, and everyone enjoy the rest of your afternoon.